Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on play and risk for children's well-being. I know that some of you are still joining us, but I think we'll get started because there's a lot to talk about and we have an hour. My name is Jane Miller. I'm the CEO of the New South Wales P&C Federation, and I'm really happy to welcome everyone here tonight. Before we start, I want to say that the P&C Federation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land, and I know that we have guests from all across New South Wales. Welcome to everyone. Just to let you know a little bit about the P&C Federation, if you're not aware of who we are, we're a not-for-profit, independent organisation. We are committed to free public education for all and advocate for parents and carers as partners in their child's education. We also provide support, advice, resources, training and advocacy for member P&C associations across New South Wales. So tonight we're hosting this webinar with world-leading play advocates, Dr. Tim Gill of Rethinking Childhood, UK, and Robyn Munro-Miller, AM, CEO of Play Australia. Thank you very much, Robyn and Tim, for being with us this evening. A little bit of housekeeping. We will have Q&A after the presentation. You can add your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen throughout the session. We have also received some pre-submitted questions, which I'll touch on as well. We'll start with a few of those. There are staff from the P&C Federation here tonight behind the scenes to assist with the Q&A, and we really will get to as many questions as we can, so please submit those questions. If you want to activate live transcript for this webinar, please go to the icon at the bottom of your screen and click on Enable Auto Transcription. We're recording tonight's webinar and it'll be available on our website, and a link will be sent to you via email within the next couple of days. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters tonight. Dr. Tim Gill is joining us from the UK, where his work has informed governments at every level to embed play as a necessary for children's development and well-being. As a global leader of the movement for a balanced, thoughtful approach to risk in childhood, Tim's research supports parents in their role of expanding children's horizons and may challenge some of our own preconceptions about play here tonight. Robyn Munro-Miller, AM, has a long-standing history as a play advocate and proponent of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child here in Australia and internationally. In her 35-year career spanning education, local government, children's services, and the charity sector, and in her current role as CEO of Play Australia, Robyn fosters an informed approach to education that recognises play at the heart of children's development. Thank you, Tim and Robyn. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jane. And I'd like to start and just acknowledge that I'm joining you from Gadigal land in the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and any Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us tonight. Always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I guess I'm kicking off this presentation this evening between Tim and myself because I just wanted to start by talking about why play is so important. And it's something that people often take for granted. And I'm sure all of us as children had a lot of great play experiences. But what we might not have realised at that time, that we were actually doing incredible things for our body. We were growing our brains. What we now know through research and neuroscience is that play is actually not just an optional thing for children, it's a biological imperative. It's important for brain development. It actually releases hormones and connects our neurotransmitters in our brain to actually ensure that our brains are able to function. And it also develops our vestibular system, which gives us the ability to balance and to move and to actually understand where our body sits in space. So there is a lot of really exciting work and research being done around play. And many people are just starting to discover that all of those times that you thought you were just playing, you were actually growing your brains and not just physically exercising. So that is why we have at Play Australia a real focus on making sure that people are aware of what's happening. And Tim's been a great advocate around the idea that children need to take risks. And so I'm going to let him talk about that. But before I do that, I wanted to say, we do recognise that play is actually a human right. So it is enshrined in what we call the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And it sits alongside all of the other human rights for children, which include, access to education, access to medical attention, the right to be with their family, the right to have an opinion on matters that are impacting on them. And those articles all sit equally. One is not more important than the other. And I often say to people, if I can't read or write, I'll be difficult in the world, but it'll make me sort of harder to function. But if I'm unable to navigate social relationships, if I haven't had the opportunity to play, it's going to actually impact my ability to work with others. Because we know that animals and as a species, humans, all have a biological drive to play when we're young, and we are the only species that actually deprives our children of play. And so when we are actually restricting children's play, drawing back on opportunities for children to have time, space, and freedom to play, we're actually doing some damage to our own evolution as a species, because through play, children learn to navigate very complex social relationships. One of the exciting things that I always think of and remember is how we used to take turns at games. And you might have a different way that you used to learn. I remember we used to do eeny, meeny, miny, mo and count off our shoes. We used to do, scissors, paper, rock, and whoever won that game. Now that in itself is children through play learning and experiencing their first taste of democracy. Their first taste of navigating a political process for who gets to go first, even if it's saying, right, I'm the oldest, so I get to go first, and the younger one's challenging that. So when we're talking about that navigating complex social relationships, it's bigger than just the friendships around us. It's bigger than just how we're going to problem solve and resolve conflicts. It actually takes us into another dimension about how our children as adults will navigate the democratic system and will learn to actually function in the community. We also need to be aware that when children play, and rough and tumble play, now often people don't like rough and tumble play, but rough and tumble play is actually really good for children because firstly, it does develop this vestibular system, which makes it that you're able to actually know where your body sits in space and also gives you balance. But the other thing that it does is neuroscience research has shown that our brain releases when we do rough and tumble and lots of physical activity during play, a hormone called, and they shorten it to BDNF. In long term, it's brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I'm going to test you all on that later, okay? But it's BDNF, and that is actually a growth hormone. So that means that when we are physically outdoors playing and being and rough and tumbling and spinning and twirling, climbing, we are actually helping our children's brains to grow through the release of that particular hormone. And of course, the other neurotransmitters that you might be familiar with, like dopamine, serotonin, even cortisol, the stress hormone, are all hormones released in the brain, and they actually help sort of connect up how our brain is thinking and functioning. So they are the sort of the building blocks for learning. And that is why often people talk about play-based learning. But I would like to stress that there is a difference between play and play-based learning. And that's something that is a very big difference, because play-based learning comes with an agenda. We as adults have got a reason for why their children are learning or what we want them to get from it. And from that perspective, that's fine. It's a wonderful way to learn. When you hear someone say, I want, the children are doing play-based learning, just remember, great way to learn. But it isn't play and it doesn't replace play. What play is driven by the child's agenda. There's often no focus, no reason for what they're doing, or sometimes it doesn't make sense why they're playing in a certain way, but it's making sense to them. And they're actually sort of in control of the process, far more in control of the process than play-based learning. But the two, as I say, can work hand in hand, and a beautiful complement. And obviously the best education is actually provided through opportunities for play-based learning. And likewise, the best opportunities for a healthy childhood are through actually activities and play that is driven by the children. When you think about the different types of play that we can provide for children, we don't have to be overly complex with it. I mean, play such as loose parts, which you might have heard of before. When we talk about loose parts, they're just objects that can be reused. They're not necessarily planned as toys. They can be old tires. They can be old pieces of plumbing pipe, materials, any sorts of construction activities, anything that you're looking at throwing out, have a look at it and say, well, maybe I should just keep a box of these sorts of play parts, as I call them, and so that children can actually take them out and they can become whatever they want to be. They can restructure them. I mean, the beauty and the joy of actually children being able to use materials and reuse materials in different ways, and to shape things and build things and construct things is a really important part of the play process, because through it, they're negotiating with other children, they're actually thinking and planning, and they're developing sort of a scope of how they want to do something. So a lot of problem-solving skills are used there. And of course, the idea of, when we're talking about risk, is one of the things when they talk about risky play, risk is a bit in the eye of the beholder, because whenever we go outside, whenever we step outside our doors, we come across risk. Okay, every morning you wake up, you are going to be taking a risk. You take a risk whether the weather is going to turn on you if you haven't got an umbrella. You take a risk whether you're going to walk across the road. Now, those risks you might look at and say are not really risks. And likewise, through the play process, a lot of the things that we call risky are not necessarily going to cause harm or danger. They're going to challenge us, and that's the important thing. If we don't allow opportunities for children to have free play, where they can make their own decisions, and they can also be sort of driven to actually problem solve and think through activities and to navigate these relationships, and if we don't have opportunities for children to actually manage risk and take risks in their play, then we are actually going to be having a child that grows up not really ready for the world, or to navigate the complexity of what the world is. And I always say insurance companies must hate it when we deprive children of play, because can you imagine a child that doesn't learn to manage risk going into the workforce? I mean, that is when they become risky. And we need to be conscious of the fact that, play in many ways is as an opportunity for children to experience the world and to navigate the world before they have to go out and really navigate the big world. It's a healthy and an essential part of every child's life. And so if we can convey no other message to you that play is a biological imperative, it is actually, and children need time, space, and permission to play, then I'll be happy if you just take away that message. And the other message I'd like you to take away is around the fact that play actually builds communities. And we have been working at Play Australia on a project called 1000 Play Streets, actually getting communities back into playing. And so if you want to set an example of how important play is, just play in the front, let the kids play in the front yard, so other parents can be inspired to say, yes, actually we can see the play is happening, and you'll be a magnet for other children to actually come and play. But we find that when we have done the research on Play Streets, we had outstanding results on mental health, not just for children's mental health, but over 85% of people reported that they actually felt better and that their mental health was improved by being involved in sort of activities where children could play together in their neighbourhood, and that they actually felt more connected to their neighbourhood, connected to the people in their neighbourhood, and they had a sense of belonging. Now, all of those things strengthen our mental health. They're good for us. And having that sense of belonging, play is a really important part. Neighbourhood play is an important part of actually building that. And so play's got many dimensions, and it's an exciting part of everybody's life. But for so long, we've often not thought of it. We've taken it for granted. But play sits alongside nutrition, sleep, and quality caregiving as essential factors for the healthy development of children. And so I will actually sort of leave that at that point and pass over to Tim, my colleague.
Thank you so much, Robyn. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'll be echoing some of what Robyn said and taking some of that forward with a couple of specific ideas about how we can improve children's play opportunities and what I sometimes call their everyday freedoms. And I'm going to be showing some slides. So let's just get that up on screen. I'm hoping that you can see a map. I'm just I think the screen's telling me that you can see a map, and what you're looking at, it's a way of kind of thinking about childhood and how childhood has changed. So the map you're looking at maps out what you might call the right to roam, or the roaming range, the home territory of 4 children. Now they're all 8 years old, but they're in 4 generations of the same family that all grew up in the same city. So that big sort of dotted blob that you can see that takes up most of the map, that's the roaming range of the great grandfather in this family. He could travel 10 kilometers, 6 miles across the city on his own from the age of 8. And then you can see how the circles shrink. And then you can see the yellow dot in the top left corner. That's the roaming range of the son in this family. It's actually a few years ago now, but he's allowed to go 300 meters to the end of his street. And in fact, that's more of a kind of right to roam than most 8-year-old children are allowed in England, and I suspect here in Australia as well. So what this encapsulates, what it summarizes is I think a really important and under-recognized change in children's lives over the generations, which I call the shrinking horizons of childhood. Now, I'm guessing the nostalgia bells are ringing loudly now, and I'm not saying that you know there was some golden age to grow up, or that our goal or my goal is to turn the clock back somehow, get in a time machine. But what I am saying is I think this is a really good starting point for thinking about what play and everyday freedoms mean in children, and to remind us perhaps of our own childhoods and how we might take this as a cue to figure out different ways that we can give children some opportunities to get to grips with the world, to figure out how things work, to navigate an uncertain but also an exciting world. Because again, as Robyn was saying, one of the things that, okay, I don't think my slides are going quite as I would wish. There we are. One of the things about childhood is that children, when they're born, are completely dependent upon adults for their most basic needs. And as children grow up, they gradually acquire more autonomy. They get a sense of their own agency. They do more stuff and they get better at stuff. And a lot of that stuff is stuff that they learn through their own efforts and their own mistakes. And so you could say that this journey of childhood is in large part about the gradual transfer of risk management responsibility from adults to children. And I emphasize that word gradual because I think actually this journey, this process is best made in a series of gradual steps. And I think one of the ways in which things are going wrong for kids today, for too many kids today, is that we're making some of those steps too big. And we're asking, you know, children to take too much on, especially I think things like that transition from primary to secondary school, and maybe 1 or 2 other points in children's lives. Now, you might be tempted to think that Robyn and I are talking about play, and that children today don't want to play. They're not interested. They're too busy on their screens and devices. Well, I saw a pretty good counterexample to that. This very morning, I flew from Adelaide Airport to be here in Sydney. And as I was going through the kind of plaza outside the airport terminal, I saw these two children. In fact, there was a third as well, just making the best of the environment that they found themselves in, to play, to test themselves, to get out of that dreadful circumstance that all children hate, which is being bored. And so, yeah, of course, technology is ever present in our lives, and it's a big part of children's lives. But actually, there's a nuance here, and one of the ways in which we can get some insights into technology is if we ask children themselves, what would you like to do in your free time? And we hear and listen to what they say, well, the answers might surprise us. So this is exactly what a team of researchers in the UK did a couple of years ago. This is a group of academics led by Professor Sonia Livingston, one of the world's leading experts on children's digital lives. But one of the questions they explored with a sample of 6 to 17-year-olds was, what would you like to do more of if you had a bit more time? And you can see the results in the chart in front of you. The most popular response for these children was to play with friends face to face. And the second most popular response was playing outside. And doing something playful on the internet was a distant third. Now you might be thinking, I don't know. I know my kids are pretty keen on their devices. Now, yes, but what's going on there? Actually, what children are doing often when they're on screens, they're socializing. They're meeting and spending time with their friends and peers in the only way that's open to them, namely in the digital realm, because for various reasons, we grown-ups have not made it easy for them to spend time playing, meeting, hanging out with friends, IRL, excuse me, IRL in the real world. So let's remember that. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what's going on for children here in Australia, and some of the problems that we can see. I'm going to touch on this idea that, this is all down to parents. I hope you will quickly realize that I don't think that's the case. And then I'm going to share two playful ideas, two kind of ways in which we can turn some of this around. And between them, they've been the focus of a lot of my work as somebody who's worked in the NGO sector, and for the last 19 years or so as an independent researcher. Central themes of my work, and remember that map that we looked at earlier. In a way, what gets me out of bed in the mornings is reflecting on and responding to that trend in children's lives. So, how are Aussie kids doing? Well, this is a chart from a recent robust study from the Australian Board of Statistics showing levels of anxiety disorder. So this is a prevalence of anxiety by age. So you can see, you look over on the left there, over 40% of girls and over 20% of boys have shown symptoms of anxiety disorder, so clinically significant symptoms in the previous year. Now that, I hope, will give us pause for thought. This is children telling us, children and young adults, I should say. So we're looking now at the young adult age. By the time they reach this young adult stage, they're really finding life tough, and not just a small minority, but a significant proportion. I'm going to turn from mental health to physical health. Around the world, we have a problem with child obesity. And I'm sorry to tell you that here in Australia, the problem is more significant than in most other countries. This is a chart that shows you the rates of child overweight and obesity in the range of rich nations. So Australia pretty near the bottom of that league table. Now, yes, obesity is caused by a number of things, but we know that one of those causal factors is declining levels of physical activity and too much time spent sitting. And we also know that outdoor play is a pretty good antidote to both of those problems. Again, the infographic you're looking at, that's not me talking as an advocate. That's not what Robyn has said as an advocate with the NGO Play Australia. This is peer-reviewed, scientific, systematic evidence pulled together on the benefits of outdoor play. In a nutshell, both physical health benefits and mental health benefits, and significant benefits as well. So we're talking about a potential, a process that could potentially make a big difference to children's health and well-being. Now, I said I wanted to say something about parents. I think there's this sort of line of thought that says kids aren't playing out so much. It's all down to paranoid parents. Now, I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. So I'm just going to think a bit about what do parents think about risk? What do parents think about their children's safety? Now, I think if we think for a minute, we realize that different parents have different views. So parents are on a kind of spectrum or a continuum when it comes to their attitudes to their children's safety. So there will be some parents, I'm guessing probably not on this call, but some parents who people will know, who are in the market for this product. Okay, I don't know if you can see that on your screen. These are toddler knee pads that mitigate against the risk of injury from crawling on hard flooring. Okay, that's at one end of the spectrum. Then at the other end of the spectrum, I don't know if you can read that headline. This is a story from my country. Mother went on holiday and left children home alone for 3 weeks. So I think we probably, if we were speaking to parents at these extreme ends of the spectrum, we might want to have words and suggest, you know, that to these parents that maybe they need to kind of have a bit of a rethink. But I think most parents are somewhere in the middle of this spectrum. Of course, they don't want their children to get hurt or upset, but they also recognize that one of the things that marks a healthy childhood, and one of the things they want for their own kids, is to grow up to be confident, capable, responsible people. And that does involve, to put it in a cliche, untying the apron strings. So I think one of the things that's happening when we think about parents, it's not about parents as a group. The problem comes with the anxious and vocal parents. Okay, that's the parents who are at this end of the spectrum, the parents who come up to a school and say, why are you running this activity or taking kids out on this trip? It's too dangerous. Why have you put in this piece of equipment into the playground? My child's fallen off and hurt themselves. And you know, we know how that sometimes goes on. And I think, again, it's the beginning of a conversation here, is to think about how can we tackle and address and engage with the anxious and vocal parents without, in effect, giving them a veto, without saying, oh, one parent's come along and told me about this thing they're worried about, so we need to stop doing it. We may well talk more about parents. But now I'm going to move on to the first of my two ideas for turning this around. And Robyn's hinted at it already. But to flesh this out, the idea which I'm presenting to you is risk-benefit assessment. Now you might be thinking, risk what? I know about risk assessments. I'm familiar with those. So what's a risk-benefit assessment? Okay, in a conventional workplace, which is where risk assessments have come from, in a workplace, risk is bad. Okay, we don't really want things that can hurt people to be in a factory or a workplace. And so the standard, the conventional risk assessment is what you call a risk reduction model. And you can see it here on the left. You figure out what can hurt someone and you introduce control measures. Risk reduction. But when we're thinking about children's play and some other aspects of children's lives, sport, recreation, actually we're in a different ball game, because there are inherent benefits that come along with that exposure to risk. So when children are able to take to get to grips with uncertainty, to have challenges, to test themselves, that in itself brings benefits. It allows children to learn, including learning from their mistakes. One thing that you could say is we need to get the difference between learning injuries and catastrophic injuries. And risk-benefit assessment is a process that allows us to take a more balanced and thoughtful approach. So in my own country, in the UK, this process emerged about 15 years ago. Now, when I was bringing up my daughter and we were going to local playgrounds, and she was aged 4 or 5, about 20 years ago now, this was our local big playground. I hope you agree, it's pretty uninspiring. Now my daughter's 25, but children who live in my neighborhood, if they're looking for a playground for adventurous children, they can go to this playground. This is Tumbling Bay. This is in the Olympic Park in London. It's an unsupervised public playground. I hope you agree it looks a little bit different to the one that I just showed you. And one of the reasons why we've seen this real kind of turning around of thinking about playground safety is because of risk-benefit assessment. And here's another area where we're seeing some really interesting changes, and that's school grounds and school playtimes. So this image that you're looking at, this is called The Cave, and it's been created by kids in a state primary school in the home counties of England. And here's a longer shot of that playground in that school, Herne Hill C of E Primary in Kent. Now, this is capturing one of the ideas that Robyn floated of kind of loose parts play, stuff that kids can do stuff with. Now, this isn't a 5-minute job. This has come about through years of piloting, development, and in this school, probably a couple of years leading up to this approach. But I visited this school about a month ago. It's remarkable to see how the children are playing in the playtimes. And one of the things that's allowed this to happen is risk-benefit assessment. Now, you might also be thinking, yeah, but kids do sometimes hurt themselves when they're playing. Yes, that's true. Outdoor play, active play isn't risk-free, but actually by comparison with other activities that children do, it isn't a dangerous thing. So this is a chart for a few years ago now, but this chart tells you in simple terms your odds of ending up in hospital from different activities. So I hope you can read that. If you really want your child to end up in the emergency room, let them play rugby or soccer or hockey. If you're looking for playgrounds in the list, there they are. They are about 1/20th to 1/50th as dangerous in terms of, accidents per hour of activity compared to those other sports. So let's get this in perspective. And again, I'm sure you've been thinking and wanting to ask about liability and litigation. Yes, claims do happen. You may have been involved in some claims yourself. And I think there is a problem. And I'm hearing people tell me here in Australia that maybe there's a wider issue about litigation. But here are some statistics for you. This is public playground claims from 2 states over a 7-year period, a total of 26 claims. Yes, it's a problem, but maybe it's not quite as bad as we think it is. And in fact, here in Australia, you've got guidance, which Robyn's organisation produced, which embeds a balanced and thoughtful approach to risk management in playgrounds. So, there's a good news story to be told about risk and risk management in play. And that's what I hope you can take away from this little segment. The second idea I want to tell you about is not looking at schools so much as neighborhoods. And the idea, in essence, it's about child-friendly neighborhoods, creating or changing neighborhoods so that they give children more freedom to play and to get around. And they they reassure parents that it's okay for their kids to go out and play. Now, again, this is me spending 3 minutes on a topic over which I've devoted 5 to 10 years of my life, but I'm going to try and communicate the essence of a child-friendly neighborhood to you in physical terms. And this is what this diagram tries to capture. There are 2 dimensions that make a place, that make a neighborhood child-friendly. One dimension is lots of choice and variety, right? Boring neighborhoods are not child-friendly. So different types of play space, nature, places to meet friends, for sport and recreation. That's the things to do dimension. But there's a second dimension, which is the mobility, the getting around dimension. And a child-friendly neighborhood, it's only where you've got both a lot of choice and variety of things to do, and it's easy for children to get around, especially get around without their parents, not dependent on the parental taxi service, that you're in this child-friendly quadrant. Now, I think there are opportunities for you and colleagues in schools and communities here in Australia to create more child-friendly places, and that's one of the messages I've been taking. One neat kind of thought experiment that captures the idea of a child-friendly place is what's in the US they call it the popsicle test, but I think you call them icy poles here. So it's the icy pole test. Is your neighborhood a place where a child, let's say an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old child, can leave their home, can go to a store, buy an icy pole, and then get back home before the icy pole melts? Okay, so you can see it's a thought experiment. Works very well in Australia, doesn't work quite so well in Iceland, but you get the picture. It brings together those 2 dimensions that I've just been talking about. The places to go, things to do dimension, in this case it's retail, but also the proximity, distance, mobility dimension. And schools can play a part in creating more child-friendly neighborhoods. So Robyn mentioned play streets as an idea. Well, one of the things that we're seeing here in Australia is a kind of twist on that, which is sometimes called school streets. And this is the idea that the street outside your school entrance can become a temporary place to play by stopping the traffic and then allowing children and parents to meet and to linger for maybe 15 minutes each, half an hour at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. Now, the photo you're looking at is a school street scheme in Melbourne, in the Council of Merribeck. Where I come from in London, in some London councils, every primary school is running school street sessions every day outside the school playground. So, as I say, in essence, for a period of time at the beginning of the day and a period of time at the end of the day, through traffic outside the school is stopped. Parents have to park a little bit away, or of course, in many neighbourhoods in London, parents don't drive anyway, but then it means more children are walking and cycling. There's this pop-up play space springing up outside the school gate, and you also get that behaviour change that means the streets outside schools are less dominated by traffic. In Australia, the pilots are tending to run once a week, by the way, not every day. But as I said, in London, but also in Barcelona, in Paris, in many cities around the world, this idea is taking off. So in fact, my closing slide features on the left-hand side, I'm signposting a report that's looked at school streets around the world as one intervention, to use the technical word, one way that we can make neighbourhoods more child-friendly. And on the right, a slightly less exciting report. This is ISO 4980. Okay, this is an industry standard. Right, so these are the Bibles for the safety world, and this industry standard is called Benefit Risk Assessment for Sports Recreational Activities facilities and equipment. Okay, this has just been published a couple of months ago. Children's play is part of the remit of this standard. And so now we have a global safety body that's saying when we're thinking about children and play and risk, what approach should we be taking? We should be taking a risk-benefit approach. So yeah, big challenges facing children. And I know you in schools are seeing the outcome of some of those challenges, the fallout, but I'm also saying there are some really good news stories about how we can start to turn this around. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim and Robyn. That was fantastic. A lot for us to think about there. Now we've had a couple of great questions come in on the live chat, and we've also had some pre-submitted questions. I'm going to start with a pre-submitted question, if that's okay. Both Judy and Catherine are interested in how parents can interact with teenagers or high schoolers in terms of play activities. So just those slightly older children.
Robyn, do you want to go first? As someone whose child is slightly nearer to the teenage years than my own, but not much.
It's an interesting question regarding how to interact, and I'm wondering is how do you support them to go and play? Was that the sort of the question?
I think so. I think so.
Yeah. Well, the reality is for teenagers, they will actually use playgrounds, and I've witnessed this on many occasions when the younger children leave, the older children tend to just hang out and hang around on the play equipment. But with older children, I think it's important, once again, the same as we do with the little ones, but we give them time, the space, and of course freedom to play, but we also obviously give them a little bit more leniency. They may travel a little further to play. We also need to encourage them to actually hang out and be with their friends, and know that play for a teenager is quite different to how they play as a child. Play often involves periods of sitting together in groups and hanging out, and then next minute they're swinging on a monkey bar or they're on a swing, and they will take risks, far more risks than younger children will, but that's part of that cycle of their development. Their brains are rewiring, and I think that's the other thing. If we don't give children when they're younger opportunities to take risk, they will take those risks when they're older. We deliver some very confusing messages to teenagers. When we have children when they're little, we say you must play with everybody and everybody's friends are all nice. When they get to 13, 14, we say to them, no, you shouldn't be hanging out with them, that you shouldn't be playing with them, you should just get rid of them. And so we deliver these mixed messages. We have to have faith when they're little. We have to set the foundation for them when they're little, of being able in a way to choose friendships and to do it politely, but make choices regarding friendships, make choices about risks and manage that risk. And then as they get older, give them more and more opportunities to hang out with friends. And as I say, that idea of hanging out is play. And often people just see, we never complain when we see a bunch of older women sitting around Westfield in a group. You see a bunch of 13, 14, 15-year-olds in a group sitting in Westfield and you have a problem. And that's, our teenagers, we really need to back off a little bit from our teenagers and give them a bit more space. We also need to be aware of play spaces that are more suited for them. And councils are increasingly starting to look at this and having a range of multi-age type equipment that they can access. So keep an eye out in your area, and also lobby your council to say what sort of play spaces do you have for teenagers, or how are you modifying spaces so teenagers can use them.
Thank you, Robyn. That was brilliant. That was a great answer. Jackie has a comment. She says Steiner schools have always known about the importance of play. I'm sure you'd be very versed in that. But she also makes the point that giving a child a phone on some level takes away the opportunity for childhood play. Do you or Tim have any comments to make about play and mobile phones? Topic, huge, I'm sure.
It's complicated. I think the tech companies have a lot to answer for, and we need to see stronger regulation. By the way, in case you haven't spotted it, my work on the whole doesn't focus on parents. Okay, I'm not putting myself up here, and I don't think Robyn is either, I'm guessing, as a kind of parenting expert or a parenting guru. To be absolutely honest, I think there are too many people telling parents how to do their job, and I think well, anyway, I don't want to join that group. So I see my role as trying to get everyone else who has an influence on children's lives to do a better job. So councils, politicians, decision makers, and corporates. And okay, if we think about tech, I do think we want to see children and young people spending less time on screens and more time IRL in the real world. Mostly, I think my work focuses on making the real world more fun and engaging and inviting and welcoming, so that the lure of the screen is less strong. But I also, personally, I've kind of been through a bit of a journey on this. I think for a lot of certainly older children and young people, it is a reality, and it will probably for the foreseeable future be a reality that their digital lives, their online lives are central. And that's not going to change. And I don't think it's helpful to kind of get into an oppositional stance about that. And in fact, if we look at how children themselves use technology, their online and offline lives are completely interlinked. So it's not the case that children are playing on their screens 1 minute and then they're playing in the trees in another. I mean, you know, it isn't working like that anymore. So I think we need to get a bit more thoughtful, we adults, about how we understand that interface between children's digital and real lives, and real world lives, and you know, recognize, as I've said, the central driver in children's digital lives, which is socializing, and because, you know, and thinking about that, and also just, you know, there's notions of privacy. I mean, when we were talking about teenagers a minute ago, I mean, I think back to my teenage years. I did some pretty stupid things. I had the kind of freedom that meant that quite a lot of those stupid things weren't seen by anybody else apart from people, you know, apart from my peers. So to be blunt, I got away with stuff. That's not so true these days. Teenagers' digital lives are documented. Because they have less freedom, they're living their lives out in the public eye in a much more visible way. And the whole idea of thinking about privacy and you know, developing a sense of agency is much more complicated. So it's kind of Robyn's point. We just need to kind of go a bit easy on teens, but yeah, I think there are design ideas as well, and neither Robyn nor I have talked that much about involving and engaging children and young people, but teens in particular have a lot to say about how their neighborhood could be made, and spaces in the neighborhood could be made better. There's lots of stuff online, simple stuff like social space, like Wi-Fi, you know, creating a kind of space that teenagers can feel some ownership of, that isn't, you know, just kind of given to them, but where they've been involved in some of the design and the facilities that have been put in. And by the way, phones and technology can actually be a tool for doing some of that stuff, for doing some of that engagement. I know that's taken things in quite a few different directions, but I guess I want to say, let's not just think that the way we create more real world play opportunities for children is by restricting their screen use. I think it is more complicated than that. We need to kind of do a little bit more to meet children and young people where they are.
And I think we've got a role as well to actually support, as well, I say some of us, our children are too old for this now, but the reality is we've got children who are using screens from the age of like a baby. I see babies. I see that we use screens when it suits us to be entertainment. So we hand it to them so we can eat our meal uninterrupted. We do things like using them ourselves in ways. We also, as role models, aren't great with regard to our use of screens, because so many of us as adults are always looking at our phones. And any time there's a break, we never just sit and look out a window, or we never sit and just look around as we look at our phones. So we're not great role models. And so I think we need to be conscious of the fact of how much children look to us as role models. Even when they're in their rebellion stage and they're wanting to be like their friends, they're still influenced by us and how we act. So I think we need to look at how our use of phone is impacting, how much we use the phones. And yes, I'm all for saying no phones at the moment, let's go and do something, but I think it has to be fair. It has to be, adults aren't going to use their phones either. And the more children are exposed to the natural environment, the more opportunities they have to go out and play, they will drop their phones. They will leave their phones if there's something exciting outside happening that they can play. If there's nothing happening, if the phone is a logical place to go to, and if they're bored or they're feeling not very confident, particularly if they haven't had experiences to build their confidence on equipment, and they haven't actually developed the body strength. And that's the thing. We've got children out there now who can't even properly sit on a chair because they haven't got the upper body strength. Where you and I might have played on those overhead monkey bars and gone across the monkey bars, there are children that just don't have that capacity because they haven't been allowed to climb. And so I think we've got we're powerful role models for our children. So if we're not happy with the level of phone use or the level of use of the screens, then we need to start looking at what we're doing as well and move it on.
Thank you so much. Some interesting comments and questions coming in. One just come in from Jackie. Can you elaborate on how we expect too much from our kids as they transition from primary to high school?
I don't know how it works here in Australia, but in the UK, that is a big transition, and
big one here too, Tim.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And lots of things happen at once, right? You're going from being the biggest in the group to being the bottom of the pecking order. You're going from probably going around the corner or not that far away to somewhere that's probably a lot further away. You're going to a building that's bigger and has more people in it, and you're doing that pretty suddenly. So I think. I'm not an expert on kind of school transition management, but I guess what it might be is an opportunity if we can smooth that transition, partly through I know there are some initiatives around introducing children, at the top of primary to secondary, but partly through helping. Let me give you a really practical example. Some schools in the UK actually stop children from walking or cycling until they're in what we call year 6, cycling in particular. Now, cycling is a great way for children to take that little extra step in their independence, okay? Because, you can cycle further than you can walk. And I know there's a heap of questions about safety, but actually, let's try and do some, be a bit idealistic. If we can make that period in the 2 years leading up to the transition a period where children get more everyday independence, including being able to cycle, not just for the last term in year 6, but through years 4 and year 5, then that is bound to help reduce the jump that we're asking children to make when they do get to that transition. So I think we just need to be thinking creatively about how instead of restricting children and reducing their freedom of action, we can increase it. And as I said, in the UK, there are some schools, there's no legal reason why they need to do this, but they're prohibiting children from cycling to school. or maybe just, you know, until a few months before that year 6. Now that I'll be honest with you, I don't think I think that's counterproductive. I'll leave that hanging.
And I would certainly say that they're managing at the same time as they're transitioning. They're managing a whole lot of complex body changes that are huge. I mean, what we know from their development is if you know of a 2-year-old, when you've got a 12-year-old, they can start to behave like 2-year-olds. You know, their brains are doing the same thing. They're reshaping and reforming. So there's a whole lot of these extra stresses. So I think managing that anxiety and managing all the questions that they have, play is a beautiful way to do that. Play and that physical exercise through play is a really important part of them understanding and getting to know their bodies.
Thank you both of you. We're running out of time, but I think I can kind of mush 2 separate questions together that follow on really nicely from the issues you've just been talking about. So Rebecca and Janelle were interested in advice on how to manage strict school rules that limit children from running and playing under the banner of safety. And we've just had a live question as well saying cartwheels have recently been banned at their primary school. So similar kind of line of questioning. How do you suggest parents work around these very strict school rules and navigate the differing appetites for play and risk in schools?
Yeah, I'll let go for Tim.
Well, it's a tough issue, and I go back to what I was saying about risk benefit assessment. There is a tool now that tackles this head on, and in doing so helps to address some of those fears that schools have about, you know, oh, we're going to get blamed, you know, we're going to get sued. If schools can give a reasonable justification, because that's what the law requires. The law requires schools to be reasonable. It doesn't require schools to eliminate risk. So that tool, and also practice and progressive moves in other schools can help build a case, because surely it's clear. Firstly, kids just like to be boisterous when they play, and as we've just been talking about, they need to be. Right, so the benefits are really clear here.
Yeah.
So let's just bring them into the picture, and I think start a conversation which will obviously have to involve the senior leadership scheme in the school, but bring to the school's attention the fact that there are good things happening in other schools in Australia and around the world that are resisting that anxiety and some of the myths and scaremongering that makes schools do some of this stuff.
Parent power is going to be really, really important here to talk about the fact that this is not actually a risk, that there are benefits to it. You know, and if you give the example of cartwheels, that's your vestibular system that you're developing. I clearly have a very bad vestibular system because cartwheels were never my thing, but they were always standard in the playgrounds. And it's about identifying, well, where in the playground can children do their cartwheels, and, you know, and allocating space. It's thoughtful, child-centered programming and planning that's needed when we're talking about, you know, managing the risks and the benefits of the play that's happened. So I think, you know, happy to have further conversations about that, because I love it when a principal bans something like that, because it's great media attention for our cause and the importance of play, because everyone does turn around and say, what? So it isn't the majority, it's just some minority who are concerned. And this is where the power of the parent voice is so important.
Thank you, Robyn and Tim. Thank you so much. We are really grateful that this Children's Week, we've been able to bring parents and families together to listen to your fantastic presentation and your very informative Q&A. For our audience tonight, our next webinar will be next week, and we'll be discussing the selective schools application process for Year 5 students. A very, very different kind of webinar. Please watch out for our follow-up email, which will have a recording of this evening's webinar, and we'll tell you about all of those upcoming opportunities. You'll also be directed to a survey at the end of this webinar, and we'd appreciate your feedback. But finally, I just want to say again, on behalf of everyone tonight, I want to give another huge thank you to Tim and Robyn. Tim, we appreciate you taking in Sydney on your Whistle Stop Australia tour, and Robyn, you know, you bring so much incredible knowledge in this area. I hope we can do some more work with you in the future. Thank you both of you tonight, and good night, and have a fun, playful evening, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.